Great, so thank you for joining today. What we're going to look at, and this particular webinar is one that's actually suitable for anybody, so hence the recording could be useful. It could be something that you might want to share with line managers. We've got a little video on it. I did one last year which was a similar sort of topic. So it's aimed at anybody, if you like. So I know that a number of you on this call, actually you might want to tell me, but I know a number of people are in HR roles or learning and development roles, so you can use the content and send it on to others if you want to, but it's just there that it is something that's sort of aimed at people who are line managers as well. I know because a number of you, I recognise a name, so thank you for being repeat webinar guests. This is me, Lucinda, still got the same setup here in terms of what I'm doing. So I'm still running the HR Uprising podcast. We put our 10 best bits of 2021 on last week, which is quite a nice episode to pull together. And we're motoring on towards our 150th episode. So if you haven't discovered that, then do feel free to give it a listen and check it out. I've still run lots of training, remote training myself, and I'll mention some of that in a moment. Reminding you, I guess, my day job, I don't just do webinars all of the time, or I run the webinars as part of my role within Actus. So I'm the CEO of Actus, and Actus is a complete performance, talent and learning management suite. We're building it out continually, always enhancing it. We know that HR professionals are often looking for a one-stop shop. You don't just want individualized systems, so we have a number of modules, which makes it a very affordable piece of software. So, but however, our origins were in the area of performance management and appraisal, and of course that's really relevant today. So we've got lots of experience from working with people and understanding their challenges around performance management and appraisal. The other things that we do, and we've done more and more of over the last couple of years, is we also have expert training and consultancy. My background was 20 odd years in corporate learning and development. So personally, this is the bit that I really love the most. So we have some on-learning e-learning, which has been developed in-house, mainly aimed at managers in a hybrid environment or change. We've got some wellbeing and resilience. And we have 3 programs. If you joined us last year, you knew we had 2 programs. We've now got a 3rd one. So we've got a brand new program all about impact and influence. So that new program is Impact and Influence in a Hybrid World. The difference is basically we've now got a suite of programs aimed at everybody. So Impact and Influence is aimed at maybe non-managers, individual contributors, particularly those people who might have joined an organisation, but been working remote since their first, almost like earliest times in working. So people are future high potential, but haven't had as much exposure to others. So it's designed to give them those sort of just those self-awareness skills around communication in a hybrid environment. Manager training, it's Management Training 101, that's still incredibly popular, and our virtual change superhero program, that's also really popular. So that one is almost full. I've got one kicking off 20th of February, there's probably 2 or 3 places left on that. We've got hybrid manager training and impact and influence all running this first quarter. So I'll give you the opportunity at the end if anyone wants to know more about any of those. Anyway, on with why you're here in terms of the content. The learning outcomes that we're going to look at in this particular session is really looking at what the practical issues might be with running appraisals in a hybrid environment. Now, I know that not everybody runs their appraisal in January, everyone runs them at different times of the year, but start and end of the year is a good time to take stock, which is why we thought it was a good time to run this session. I want to think about the impact of running it remotely or managing people remotely, and potentially helping managers to mitigate any risk or impact in doing that. I've got 6 areas that I'll run through to give it a structure to think about around those areas. Some may be more relevant than others, and as ever, I'll try and make it as practical as possible in terms of the examples and tips. So in terms of our overall feeling about this, let's start using the chat. Let's get ourselves warmed up. So what in your organisation has hybrid working, assuming you are hybrid working, but if not hybrid working, let's say what has the last 2 years, which has been an abnormal environment, meant for appraisals in your organisation? So I'm going to get you to do some chat on this and we'll see what the chat comes through, but I've also put a poll up because that will allow us to think about the poll at the same time. So let me put the poll up. So I was thinking from the businesses that we've worked with, what has typically happened. So Yeah, so Molly's saying there's been less employee and line manager conversation face to face. Yeah, I would definitely say that's consistent with what I've experienced. Let me put the poll up as well and explain what's there. Asking you to do two things at once, but I know it takes a while sometimes for the chat to come through. Not everyone feels confident. So I just suggested 4 options really, and a something else. So either you might be a really established organisation with really established processes, so nothing changed, just continue the same remotely. It may be you didn't have a structured appraisal in place, you didn't really have structured performance management appraisal, and nothing changed there either. So there may be no change based on this. Either you continue to be structured or you didn't, because you hadn't got a great deal in the first place. Others may be very consciously adapted to the cycle. I know some of the NHS, they were allowed, it was interesting actually, I don't know if they were allowed not to do the appraisal, but they took it out of the employee survey, which was interesting because they obviously knew they were going to get marked down on it. So maybe something was consciously added in or reduced, or one of the things I've heard more and more of, and I think that's why this is perhaps relevant to think about, is people lost some structure. They perhaps didn't set objectives because everyone, let's say you do them at this time of year, everything went out the window, and then almost we've got into bad habits. So maybe we need to think about refreshing or helping people to get back on track. So that's what I was thinking, or something entirely different. So I'll give you a little bit longer on the poll. 76%, thank you, have managed to respond on the poll. Let's just have a quick look down the chat and see what you have. So yeah, Alicia, that is it's sadly really common. So this is good. Maybe this is a shot in the arm, because actually this is new normal, right? So you're saying you had them before and nothing's happened since 2009. Yeah, okay, I'm going to share the results and let's go back and look at your comments. So if you want to explain more, anyone else want to participate in the poll, I'll just give it 2 more seconds in terms of that. We're at 78%. One more person up to 80%. Okay, I'll go 3, 2, 1. I'll end the poll and share it, and then you can see one person did something else. So if you did something else, tell us what your something else was. So we can see like some people, so 33%, 14, you've managed to continue the structure. 14% didn't really have a huge amount of structure previously. The maths doesn't make sense to me on that in terms of the percentages. Some of you were conscious at adaptation, but you're returning to normal. But some of you, quite a proportion, found things have got a bit out of. That's what I'm seeing as well. I'm seeing quite a lot of people feeling almost got into bad habits now. And as many businesses going, we're going to carry on working like this. Maybe we need to make sure that we are managing people well. At the start of COVID, anecdotally, I feel that lots of people were having weekly one-to-ones and really putting lots of effort into managing people. But now I think there's possibly risks around people getting isolated, and those conversations have become a little bit rare. And that maybe this is why this is a good time to think about something like this. How do we refresh it in 2022 and pick things up? So Richard, yes, hi Richard. Yes, so it was paused due to COVID. So maybe this is a really important time to think about reinstating something. It's the start of the year, really good opportunity. Duncan, your organisation kept going. Great, just done over Teams, brilliant. It helps, of course, if you've got quite a process-driven, quite an established organisation. It may really vary on how well something was embedded. Some of you, they've gone out the window, right? So Rebecca, you're starting up, so you're actually trying to establish it from the start. So you bear in mind then those ways of working. At least I suppose you can take it into account. I mean, the reality is a performance management process that should be able to be done virtually. I think the main challenges I've seen in this chat is that some managers, as Stephanie's saying here, the more thoughtful ones have been really conscientious, tried to be face-to-face, tried to schedule the time in, really worked at seeing where their people are delivering, but others haven't so much, and it's almost given them an excuse. So I think there's definitely been that type of thing, and it's easy to use the whole hybrid work, this whole thing as being it can be used as an excuse. And now this does seem we are going to go to an endemic stage, so we need to work out how to manage things. It is harder, Tanya, totally, to set objectives when the future is so unclear. But I think my position on that, I won't go into that in huge detail here, but my position on that is it's almost all the more reason to set some objectives, but maybe they need to be shorter term. Maybe they need to be like quarterly, or those sort of things, and just revisited more often and tweaked more often. The reality is, if we think about it, 5 years ago, if you were set an annual objective, it was very often out of date 12 months later. It's not just COVID that has made a 12-month period of time actually an unrealistic amount of time for an objective. The whole thing is it should be much more fluid. From an L&D point of view, says Carol, she's having to constantly reinforce feedback, one-to-ones, etc. Yes, and actually, of course, it does depend. Obviously, I'm a bit biased, but if you've got a system or software where you can see if they're happening or not, that helps, because it's not just manager-employee visibility, it's also HR or learning and development. Whoever is the custodian of the process doesn't have the visibility either. So that's tricky. Yeah, one-to-ones are absolutely key, Joe. That's the key. Being able to update objectives, still set and agree them, or deliverables, make sure people understand what they're doing to feel deliverables, but have those one-to-ones still. Yeah, so more frequent, regular conversations. And in reality, those have always been the important things, Molly, haven't they? They've always been good things. Great. Thank you very much for all that feedback. So looking now in terms of where we are with this, let's think about what can we do, or what can we encourage others to do? And some of you might be doing this. If you are, whether you've got an established process or not, what can we use to gather performance when we've got reduced face-to-face interaction? That's the key. So how can we still think about people's performance, and recognize them for the efforts they're doing objectively when we're not seeing them in the office as often as we did previously? What do you think? What ideas, what information have you got on that? I agree, Tanya. I think you really do need to handhold remote working people, and it's really easy for things to go off track, particularly sort of younger members of staff who haven't, they almost can, without you realizing, start doing things differently, or just make up their own ways of doing things they don't always want to ask. So it is really, really easy for us to get disconnected and maybe not realize for a bit longer. So what information might you use? Tell me in the chat if you're going to evaluate performance when we've got reduced face-to-face interaction, or what would you encourage people? So we've got here, right, so Grace, absolutely. So if you're talking regularly with all team members, there's Grace, so you're almost getting that feedback all the time fluidly. Lisa, I agree. Yeah, maybe 360 feedback or contribution from others. So maybe you can gather more information from customers, colleagues, peers. So feedback becomes more useful as a tool, doesn't it, in these circumstances, because we have to realize, I mean, in reality, managers don't always see everything, but that could really, really help. Yep, so feedback is useful. And so maybe getting into the habit of getting that, whether it's face-to-face through team meetings, or whether it is through something more structured like a 360, catch-ups, use video. So all of those. What about the old traditional objectives, of course? So setting objectives, making sure that maybe they are weekly, monthly, quarterly, so people still have those outcomes of things. Because of course, 360 feedback or something like that, what you need to think about is whether you're asking for evaluation against someone's behaviours or performance. And actually, performance should really be more objective, regardless. If people have got objectives that are set on outputs, it should be quite clear if people have achieved them or not, whereas the feedback is really helpful for people's development in terms of whether they're demonstrating the right behaviours. Timesheets, data metric stacks, absolutely. Okay, brilliant. So the things, these are the 6 information sources. Yes, milestones, totally, Carol. The 6 information sources that I think that we can use, and I'm not saying this is the be all and end all, and I'm not saying that all of them are equal, but the things that I would think about when we are seeing our people less often. So first of all, I'd say, let's think about performance against defined objectives and milestones. And I understand the point that was made earlier by the lady, I'm sorry, I can't remember who it was, that's gone up in the chat, the lady in healthcare, where actually it's an uncertain future, so it can feel harder, but maybe let's make sure that that's not just an excuse that all of our people have got into, because reality is we can always agree, whether it's your to-do list, you can always agree goals. They just might need to be monthly or weekly, whatever. So if we've got out of the habit of setting those, and I'll do a poll in a moment on that to understand your view on that, really let's not underestimate it. Something I say that comes from the research is that if you want to look at the evidence, behavioural evidence as to what actually drives high performance, it's all about clear goals and objectives, and that doesn't need to be annual, any period of time, and regular feedback. So there's no magic formula, and that's the key to performance, and it's the key to engagement for people. And then second, it could be also outputs or deliverables that we've seen evidence of. So that for me is, you think that's obvious, and you might think those outputs or deliverables should be linked to the objectives. But the reality is lots of people are doing a job at the moment, and it's quite possible that in these slightly strange circumstances, if their objectives were not updated, they may well have still been doing things which were very relevant and beneficial to the business, but are not reflected in their objectives. So I think there's something there about us being open-minded about, okay, so you know what, they may not have delivered the numbers of new leads or numbers of demos that we wanted, but they have created a host of product collateral that we needed for a new product release. So, and actually that was something that was urgent and business required. So you can think about those outputs or deliverables that you've seen evidence of. The flip side of it, you can also think of whether or not they were doing deliverables which was perhaps not required, and I'll come on to that later. We can think also of what we've seen and heard. So how are people interacting in the virtual? If you're only talking to people through Teams or Zoom, what's their style of interaction? What's their style of interaction on email? So behaviours are not just face-to-face, behaviours are visible through virtual means as well. So we can think about that. Exactly as a number of you said, feedback from customers and colleagues, feedback from the individual. So don't underestimate coaching the individual to ask them what they think they've done, their abilities. And then finally, this was even more important, I'd say, last year, but I think there's different kinds of mitigating circumstances this year that's worth thinking about. So I'll just run through each of those in turn. Don't worry, I won't take too long on each one. And these are coming out to you, these slides, for those of you who've joined. The slides and the link to the recording will come out to you if anyone's wondering. So just focusing on this particular question here, I'm intrigued about objectives, because objectives is the one area I feel that may have gone out of the window with for more, and again, that's me anecdotally, so I thought I would ask you whether or not that's true or not. So if you've had objectives in the last 12 months, and understanding that you have different, everyone's going to have a slightly different cycle here, what challenges do you think you've had for people being able to demonstrate? So on that point one, if you were to evaluate how well people have done their appraisal against their objectives, which of those challenges, if any of those, are there that you might have experienced? I'll give you a chance to just respond on those. Great. So Carol, that's what you're saying. Your leadership team's been recognising where people have done things above and beyond. So even though they weren't in there, but they've been recognised for it. So that's brilliant. In terms of that, what would be even better, of course, is if we were in the habit where we'd updated objectives to make sure they reflected things and it lines up, but it's been unusual times. And I think that's the thing that I'd say now, as we are evolving back into a new normality, maybe that's the thing to do. Is it about objectives that we need to become a bit more disciplined and making sure that we are updating our objectives to make sure that they are reflective of what the expectations are, so we don't have problems at the end of the year. 61% participated with objectives so far. I'll count down from 5 and share this one. Yes, when you have a different strategy from the top. That's just while I wait for a few more people to respond. One of the other things you often do find is, I heard it yesterday from one of our customers, they'd had a restructure and it takes a while for the objectives to cascade. Again, if we're line managers, or if we're encouraging line managers, obviously you do want objectives to align with the strategy, but usually you can still agree deliverables with people. They know what's important and you know what's important. So don't let that put you off agreeing things which would sit as goals, objectives, or KPIs in some way, so that people get that sense of satisfaction. That's one of the main things is that's lacking, is people can feel like they're not achieving anything. They're doing stuff, they're really busy, but they may not get that satisfaction of achieving if it's not lined up with their objectives. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll in 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's share this one. So the challenges that you found here really were predominantly other distractions took you and their eye off the defined objectives. So survival, where to work, all those kind of things. And Greg actually they had a restructure. So funny enough, you're not the only people I've come across that. So that makes it hard, doesn't it? Then, of course, there have been circumstances out an individual's control. So let's say your customer, your account manager, your customers are retail or hospitality. That's going to make it very difficult for you to support, isn't it? So those are genuine reasons. And those are the sort of things that would have fitted into mitigating circumstances, I would say, last year. I believe there's slightly different ones this year. Other ones, classic, perhaps objectives were not written, and also quite a lot weren't set in the first place. So, I guess we know we've been through 2 years of this now. So I suppose my take on this now is that it's quite important for us, if we're in roles where we can influence it, or if we are line managers, we should not let it affect us, that we don't use it as an excuse anymore. Objectives are so important. So that's key. So you're only open 27th of September and no objectives are set. Lorinda, it's not too late. I think January is a perfect time to be agreeing objectives. So don't let that stop you. That's only 3 months ago. That's fine. Most of businesses take 3 months to do it annually. So it sounds like January, get some agreed. It's so important. And let's make sure ideally they're reviewed at least quarterly so that they stay relevant and they're adjusted. They shouldn't be set in stone. It should be something where you can update them and keep them relevant. So a number of you are saying, so I think Carol just said that their leadership were great at recognising unplanned outputs. In unusual times, people are still working really, really hard. Some people are working ridiculous hours. And we need to evaluate unplanned outputs. And I think this is really important for a number of reasons. These are the questions that I would ask if I was looking at unplanned outputs. First of all, would they have qualified as new objectives had you been on it? Had we been updating a system monthly and they'd have gone in, would they have gone as new objectives? And if that's the case, then treat them like objectives and absolutely acknowledge and recognise that. So the key with that is, were they necessary / agreed? Were they valuable to the business? Now, those two questions for me, I think, are relevant because if they were valuable to the business, that's brilliant. But it could be that people were doing things because they were as displacement activities because they didn't want to do something else. So did they do them at the expense of an objective? So were they being used as an excuse? Because that, to be honest, that should have been noticed by the line manager, but that would, to me, is not say, oh, very well, you did that, but you weren't asked to do that and you didn't do your objectives and you could have done. That is a different conversation from your objectives were unachievable, we didn't update them, and you did these key deliverables, which were really, really important, and it was all about being agile and moving to meet the needs of the business. So you need to evaluate those, and actually, ideally, it shouldn't take until the end of the year to have that conversation. It should be picked up earlier. And ideally, they would have been agreed, and if we were being good line managers, we would have been talking about them throughout the year and would have picked that up. And the other one is, even more than that, were they a potential example of someone overperforming or pivoting to meet demand? So unplanned outputs, many of them are amazing and should be recognised, especially, if instead of objectives that were unachievable or otherwise. But if they were something that, if they were expensive things, then it needs to be addressing, because that could also be something which is underperformance. It's almost people sort of, it's the Googling, just doing things to be busy as opposed to the things that need to be done, and that needs to be addressed. And that again probably comes back to people realizing that they have objectives that are important. So then let's think about behavioral evidence. So if we're thinking about behavioral evidence, so it's still thinking about how people operate. We might talk about what people do, but also the way in which they do it. And in hybrid working, that's so important, because you've almost got to be more proactive. You've got to work harder to include others, to share information. There's less sort of by the coffee machine chat. You've got to think quite hard. It's very easy to become more siloed. So identifying those sort of things, these are the sort of things that you can think about if you want to notice what people have been doing. See how they are interacting. Maybe we don't really observe things like that. It might be a wake-up call for us as line managers, is do we notice what people are doing positively or not? Is it somebody who is always ready to have a social interaction? They always join the socials, they reach out, they share information proactively through whatever channels they are. Do they proactively offer information, or the opposite? So all of those sort of things are really, really important. Then let's look at feedback. And many of you said you would do that anyway. So feedback, I think, is really key. The model, I'm sure many of you heard of the SBI model. It's quite a simple model for feedback. Could be something you can share with your organization. So talking about situation, behavior, and impact. So if we're seeking feedback or providing feedback, if you were going out as a line manager to others and sort of said, oh, you know, what do they think of so-and-so? People say, oh yeah, they're great, or they're good. Okay, could you give me a specific example? You know, perhaps the situation, exactly what it was that they did and what the impact of that was. That's so much more helpful, because there's no point in saying to somebody, oh yeah, you're really good at so-and-so, or even worse, you're really not very good, or you did a bad job. That's terrible. You can't give that feedback. It's got to be more defined than that. So if you are asking for sort of qualitative statements of feedback, then use something like the SBI model. It's still important, as with any feedback, the feedback is not fact, it's still perception. Don't underestimate the individual's view of their own feedback. I think it's really useful to value that. At the end of the day, that person is with themselves 100% of the time. So everybody else is just getting snapshot. That's not saying that their self-perception is right. And having done a lot of 360 feedbacks over the last years, my experience is that 90% of people actually underestimate their own capability. They talk themselves down. But certainly encourage people to learn to reflect, seek feedback. Those coaching skills are really useful. And you can use things like 360 to increase the quality and objectivity. If you've not come across the SBI model, here's an example that you might use. Let's say the topic is around, they've got an objective around customer service, or it could be you've got a competency which is around values or behavior like that. So I might say, okay, situation. On the recent account management call where the customer started to challenge our SLAs, so last week on such and such, we were on that call together with customer X and they started to challenge the SLAs, remember? The behavior I noticed, so I noticed means it's quite specific. You listened carefully, you kept calm, and you acknowledged their concern. You then went on to clearly demonstrate that we're meeting all their SLAs, but reassured them that you would also investigate their incident. So that's what you saw or heard your colleague doing. What was the impact of that? Well, the impact was that the person was visually reassured. So I could see from their face over Teams that they were reassured. The call ended positively, and you followed up within 48 hours, which has resulted in them not moving from a complaining customer into one that's bought additional licenses. So that's a clear demonstration of someone doing a really good job with their managers. Thanks, sorry, S jargon, SLA, service level agreements. So it's a sort of thing where customers expect you to pick up the phone within 4 hours or to respond in a certain way when you've got an ongoing contract with the customer. So that's just an example of how you might use SBI, and clearly it would be relevant to your organization. If you want to use something like 360, then this can be quite useful. I really think that 360 is best used with behaviors personally. I don't think it should be used with objectives unless you really can't see it, because I think if you write a SMART objective, it should be obvious if people have achieved it. But in terms of generally people's, actually their broader confidence, their self-development, 360 is incredibly valuable. And the reason it's quite useful is because you get nice images like this. So this is what we, in our 360, you get a spider graph. And what that's showing is that different types. So let's imagine that, I can't see what color it is. So the purple one is the individual. They get different categories of subject to responding. So you get the individual, the manager. Then if you're a manager, they get direct reports, it could be customer, it could be peers. So you get a feel for how different people are interacting with you. And that could be really useful in these remote times, because we're getting different level of visibility with different people. It's an opportunity to reach out for maybe people in other areas that you used to work with, or you should be working, or to customers. And you get it in a nice quantitative way, and you also get comments. So that's a useful tool to get a broader view. It's really good for people to have some development. And I think they really value it, because we've been doing a lot of that lately. Then consider any mitigating circumstances. And this is where last year, the first year, where the world was thrown into lockdown, you know, with no warning. This year is our second year at it. It's the end of our second year at it. So it is year 2 of unusual times. But I put that in inverted commas because I think unusual times are kind of evolving now to be more usual times. We're never going to go back completely to how we were. But what I do think is that what was different last year, as in no one really knew what was going on. We were going, oh my gosh, you know, we're working remotely. I haven't got a desk. I haven't got, I haven't got a chair or decent broadband. It's different now. This time, though, what we have got, and I'm aware of the lady who said she works in healthcare, for example, we've got long-term exhaustion, stress, uncertainty, possibly grief, right? So people who have been in emergency mode, who've had the adrenaline going, coping, for 24 months on, we can't continue like that. So mitigating circumstances might be slightly different. I mean, I spoke to someone who's one of our customers a couple of days ago, and she was saying that she's now bounced back, but 12 months ago, she just wasn't performing. And her manager kind of had filled out this form and was almost rating her. She was 12 months ago. She wasn't performing because she just, I don't know, she was, her head wasn't in it. So people will have gone through phases of being, their heads being in it and not, and hopefully they're bringing them back. So it's different things that I think we have to think about in terms of mitigating circumstances. Have we given them the support? How's their general well-being and health? Have they got to the stage? Some people now have really got to the stage where they may feel they don't have as much belonging in the organisation. I was speaking to a lady called Linda Holbeck. I'm going to record on that. She's a bit of a guru yesterday about employee engagement and what's different. And my sort of hypothesis was that employee engagement used to be all about performance, but it feels that it's now more about belonging and well-being, and she felt that that is the way it's going as well. So I think it's interesting that that term is different from what it was 10 years ago, potentially, and with people all working more remotely, it's more important to have that loyalty. So another thing to think about is someone feeling isolated without belonging. No brainer, but are we actually agreeing objectives or not? Have we just got into terrible habits, or did we never have the habits in the first place? Those need to be re-established, because it's still objectives and feedback that drives performance. Has our organisation got into poor management habits, in which case it's not really that individual's fault. So those are my thoughts of mitigating circumstances. If anyone else wants to say any other mitigating circumstances, please drop them in the chat. I'd be very interested in those. I'm nearly getting to the end for guys who've got to dash off, so we should be done by 10 past. Finally, no brainer, but think about setting up for success in terms of the appraisal. Make sure that you've had enough time to think about it and set aside enough time to fully focus on the individual. If it has to be done remotely, make sure it's the appropriate environment in terms of the timing, maybe the location in terms of that, time of day, all those sort of things. Remember to act as a coach, ask questions. These are all same sort of points, really, pre and post. Make sure it's positive. It really, if you're doing an appraisal sometime soon and the objectives aren't there, it's got to be a positive experience for people, and therefore taking the time to give them some constructive recognition for what they have done is really key. Do some preparation, be ready to give recognition, direction, clarity of expectations, share the responsibility, get them to complete information first. In our system, we allow them, you can do it so you can see what they've said first, and the manager can then put their notes in, which can be really helpful to see where people's heads are. Consider those 6 information sources, just because it's not as simple as it used to be. There are other things that we need to take into account, and do give it built-in time. If you want to gather feedback, that's going to take a bit of time, so you need to allow yourself a few weeks actually to get objective feedback. You can't expect to get quality feedback within 48 hours of doing the appraisal, so plan for it if you intend to use feedback. Okay, now I was going to use that as a poll, but I haven't done that, as it turns out. So that's the content that I wanted to share with you in the time available. We will send the slides out to you. Any comments on anything there? Oh, that's it. So you've developed. So Joe, are you saying, is that your new appraisal scheme, which is about wellbeing and how people are feeling? Do let us know in the chat if anyone who's made any changes, any suggestions, anything that's working, share with others. It's really helpful, some of the ideas that come out of this. So if you're going to use any of those 6 areas, any of those you think you need to do more of this year, any ideas that you've come up with in your business to improve it, do let us know. And I'll just whiz through the wrap-up slides as well. Just while I wait for any chat that you want to share or any comments that you want to put in the chat, these are the 2 new courses. So the Impact and Influence course is a brand new course aimed at individual contributors that I mentioned earlier. quite exciting. We've had 360 for a long time, but we've got a brand new, we're calling it 360 now, ready to go 360 system. Really simple. You can just run it. It's got ready to go templates. It's kind of an off-the-shelf setup and pricing. No long-term tie-in. It's one of those things you just kind of buy year on year. So that's quite an exciting product, because we've seen more and more people want feedback. So if you're looking to introduce feedback, do take a look at that. Keep an eye out, actually, because we're launching that at the end of the month. We'll be putting out some forums and webinars on that. So if you want to know more on that, let us know. Lots of things coming up. Full agenda of going out on the website. Running the HR Uprising Coffee Club, that's going to run regularly. So that's an opportunity to network with colleagues, where we'll do a topic, put you into small breakout rooms, and you can chat and share ideas on topics. Various webinars. We're going to continue to run 2 webinars a month. The model will be one aimed at HR, OD, people professionals, and one suitable for all. So that this one was an example of something. Yes, I'm putting an HR slant on because I know many of you are HR, but you could invite managers to it as well in terms of thinking how to prep. Other useful links, and let me just put the final poll up for anybody who does want to know more about anything that we're offering. Pop that there. If you want to know anything about any of the training programs, the system, 360 or Actus Academy, you can nominate there. Yaki or one of the colleagues will pop back to you. Other links, if you want to sign up to future webinars and take a look at them, Gemma has popped that into the chat to make it easy for you. There are links in these slides that will come out to you. So Tanya's saying hybrid working makes it harder to identify staff with mental health or other distress. It does. It rely on them to self-identify. Or, I mean, it means that you do need the manager to really know them. That's the thing. You need managers to have stayed connected. And that's the thing. Vivian's saying there's often an expectation if you achieve objectives, they'll be rewarded, which may not be possible financially. So that's a question. Okay, and also any other questions? Well, Vivian, I think the key for me, I don't know what kind of organisation you work in, is that this is a bit of a leadership question. It's about being open and honest about the environment you're working in. So actually, in a high performance culture, we're all pulling together to try and deliver the best for the organisation. If the organisation is struggling despite best efforts, then we have to ride through those difficult times. It's got to be a win. People have got to be grown-ups when working for an organisation. My view is it's got to be win-win. So they need to contribute and the organisation needs to contribute. And when good times are there, we should recognise people. But sometimes we have to recognise that it's been a really tough time for everybody. And actually, we should feel really fortunate to have jobs in lots of places. So I think that's about being grown-ups. And the flip side of it is that if people are not achieving objectives, well, that's not really fair on the organisation, right? So, you know, the people come to, you know, they're paid to do a job which includes achieving objectives. And that's large parts of that is actually what your salary is about. If we can overachieve and deliver, then brilliant, and reward that, that's fantastic. But I think it's about looking at it's a bit about the psychological contract, really, that, isn't it? So for me, that's about people being realistic about where they are. And some of it is about leadership, communicating about the challenges that they're dealing with. I don't know if anyone else got other comments on that, or if you want to expand on that, Vivian. Has anyone else got any other questions that they'd like to drop in the chat? Please feel free to do so. I'll also just pop my own contact details up here. If you've come across, link in with me by all means. If you're on LinkedIn, great to be connected. We also have an HR Uprising LinkedIn group, which you can find if you want to network with other people. And we always post things first there, where we're going to do things like coffee clubs and things. So we'll put those on there as well. Okay, so I'll give it a couple more minutes and see if there's any more questions, but I haven't seen anything else coming up yet. So thank you so much for joining the first of our webinars of 2022. I hope you'll join future ones or mention them to people in your team if they're more relevant to them. As said before, we will send the recording round and the slides. Thank you for joining.